Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about the Purposeful Purse, finding meaning in spending, with our wonderful guest from Toronto, Canada, Nicole Mead. Welcome to the show, Nicole. I would love to introduce you to our audience, and then I would love to get you to share a bit more about yourself because you seem to have an amazing bio and background here. Nicole aims to uncover novel psychological insights that can be harnessed to improve personal, societal, and environmental well-being. She is the founder and director of the Wellbeing Research Lab, WiRL. Her research has been published in Science, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes, Journal of Consumer Research, and Journal of Marketing. Nicole received her PhD in social psychology at Florida State University. Prior to joining Schulich, she held faculty appointments at Católica Lisbon School of Business and Economics, Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University, and the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Melbourne. Nicole serves as area editor for the International Journal of Research in Marketing and ERB member for Journal of Consumer Research. Welcome to the show again. I'm so glad that you're here with us at nighttime where you are.
Thanks so much, Lou. It's a pleasure to be with you, although I do wish I was in Melbourne instead of being in Toronto.
Yeah, well, it's so wonderful because, I get to meet guests all over the world. And like yourself, some of the guests have actually been in Melbourne, which is quite rare. Not a lot of them have been here. And it's always more fun to have a conversation here live in Melbourne. But I'm glad because we have some common ground. You've been in Melbourne before. And, I think it's just great to kind of share that. So hopefully, one of these days you get to go back to Melbourne and we can probably have a conversation like this, but in person instead of virtually. So, I see your bio and I kind of go, you've done a lot of research. Our show is about well-being and, your whole career seems to sort of focus on this area. And I know today we're talking about the aspect of financial well-being, in the context of our well-being in particular. But since you're so focused on well-being, I got to ask, why did you choose this as a topic for your, research, for your studies, and especially for your career? And it seems like you're going to do this forever. So why?
It's a good question. To be perfectly honest, I wanted to study people. As you said, I was trained as a social psychologist. And when I started my PhD in social psychology, I felt like there was a lot of negative perspectives in research. So people are always looking at the bad side of behavior. So why are people aggressive? Why do people drink too much? Why do people spread gossip about other people? Why do people cheat on their partners? I think these are all important questions, but what seemed to be missing is more of this positive aspect of how can we live a better life? And I think my bio, which when you read it sounds kind of scary, I'm kind of a bit of a nomad. But in life on a day-to-day basis, that's what I think about is how can my family, my friends, other people, how can we all live together better? How can we enjoy our lives more? How can we do better for our society and our planet? And I think I'm really lucky to get up every day and ask those type of questions and answer them. So I think it's just really, where my mind goes on a natural basis on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's beautiful. I love it because you're so right in saying that there's a lot of talk about negative things in this world, and I actually found this to be like a particularly disturbing thing that I've learned in the past few years. So basically, we've got a lot of groups on Facebook, right? And one of the groups that I'm in is for international students from Vietnam in Melbourne. And when I joined the group, I'm kind of similar to you. I want to find positive things in life, and what I saw was just not what I expected. Instead of posts focusing on students' well-being or, like how students can thrive, most of the posts there and most of the posts that get a lot of engagement would be ones about dramas. Yeah. If it is something bad, people tend to participate more. If it is something good, chances are they might not participate. So
it's a hard battle for me as a researcher, because you're right. That's what gets engagement is negative things. There's this axiom, it's bad is stronger than good, and people pay attention to negative things for good reason. It helps us, when we work through and we pay attention to negative things, that helps us learn how to be more like adaptive, what to avoid, what not to do. And so negative things get engagement. And so it's a challenge sometimes as a researcher to study things in a positive way to make sure you can get your work published and people to pay attention to it. So when an institute like yours reaches out, I'm so happy to participate in it, because I do think that there's, some positives that we need to discuss.
Yeah, definitely. I do think we need to focus a bit more on the positive sides of things and the positive things in life, because the show is about well-being, right? And what I have learned through this show, at least, and I'm sure your research would reflect on it, is kind of similar to that practice of gratitude and what you pay attention to. If you pay attention to positive things, you'll start to notice more positive things, and more positive things will come to you as it feels like. Maybe it's not the actual case, but our brain is trained like that, or it's wired that way. And I find that to be really interesting when I reflect on my own lives and what I notice on most of the time. And just like what you're saying, that's what the research would help, because I think we probably don't spend enough time thinking about positive things. And that's where we have all these issues. But it's going to take a lot of learning for all of us.
100%. And, I think there's a separation that we have to make from what media can make money off of, which is, and what algorithms are programmed to show us.
Yeah.
And what we think on a daily basis will actually improve our well-being. And I think there's a separation there, like you're saying. And so if you do seek out the positives and you focus on them, and then more positives come back, I think you can keep away from the negatives. Both are spirals. Negative, and positive. They're reinforcing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hopefully today we can learn to notice positive things, from the financial well-being perspective as well. And we're going to talk about that very soon. Now, before we start, we've got a section we called Have You Met Nicole? This is where we're going to get to know you a bit better through some of your favorite things. My first question, and I say this all the time, I love asking this question because I love to read. What is your favorite book?
I have to say A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I mean, I love all of Ernest Hemingway's books, but that one I've reread so many times. And I think in part because he writes about the 20s in Paris, but also what it means to be a writer. And I, for me, am on a daily basis trying to become a better writer. But it's just written, I don't know, just very beautifully, and I love it. If you haven't read it, check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I have not read that, by the way, so we'll definitely check it out. Thank you for sharing. What about a movie that you love?
A Sound of Music. Amazing. Yeah, classic. If you haven't, start to pick it up. I'm a bit of a classics person. So yeah, amazing scenery, beautiful singing. It's just probably like the world could be falling apart. I can watch that show or that movie and I can feel better again. It's just very uplifting.
Yeah, that's the word, uplifting for sure. And yeah, glad to hear that. Now, I'm not sure if you're a podcast listener yourself, even though you're probably a podcast guest on many shows. And if you are a podcast listener, which show is your favorite?
The one I listen to most consistently would be the Ezra Klein show from New York Times. He has some great guests. Usually they're authors of books, and I like the questions that he asks. He does lots on politics. I don't really listen to those so much because it's very American focused, but he has a lot of guests who talk about policy, about the environment, and then also just, again, about how to live a better life. So how to build relationships and relationships that are not normative, or connect with other people, or have better attentional well-being. So that's the one I listen to most consistently.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I wonder if you have a role model in life, or perhaps multiple role models in your life.
Oh, that's really, there's so many amazing people out there. I don't know. Do you have a role model?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I would say I have multiple, I used to think that I had one role model growing up. And then, I just found so many people that I admire. Like, for example, I admire Taylor Swift. I've talked about that so many times for her creativity and, her resilience, and for just, how amazing all the songs that she writes. And anyway, I'm going to her concert this week, so I gotta say that.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. Yeah.
So exciting, I know. I love Brené Brown for her research and for speaking up on, difficult topics, and for opening up about her own life, and really share insights that help us to be better humans and better leaders, because leadership is important to me, and I learn a lot from her. I admire Artem Grant for his research as well. I got to read his books in the recent years, and one book that I read all the time, again and again, is Think Again, because that challenges how I see the world and how I see my work, my life. I admire my mother, for the fact that she sacrifices herself for everybody else, and sometimes maybe a little bit too much. But I do admire that, she really has her priorities straight. And sometimes life's hard on her, but, she seems to smile through it all. So I think, I've got so many different role models. What about you?
Yeah, so I'd say one of them is my grandmother, who passed away many years ago. She was a musician growing up. So she was a pianist, and she had this very glamorous, but I think tough life in that sort of role in the spotlight. But I used to love going to visit her. She would play, especially when I got older, she would play all this great jazz. So that's how I got to know Bill Evans, for example. Or she would play the piano, and we'd drink martinis. And she was like a mother, best friend, grandmother, all rolled in one. And I just thought she was a brilliant, poised, just energetic human being. So she was definitely one. Yeah. And then recently, I'm thinking about all these people who've recently passed away. There was an amazing academic named Jerry Korn. He was at the Hong Kong Baptist University, and he was just like one of the most authentic, kind people you'd ever meet. He was brilliant. And he was like one of those people, when you meet them, it feels like they know you right away. They're just so perceptive, and so present in the moment. And one of the things I appreciate is if students were stressed, which they often are in academia, he would crack a joke and make them feel more comfortable. And I think that ability for someone to be who is very senior, very established, very prestigious, to be so humble and warm towards PhD students, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you for sharing your role models with us. And, just like you and me, I'm sure a lot of people in our audience have so many people they admire and affect them throughout their lives. And one thing I will have to say is the list will keep getting longer and longer, as we go through life, because we learn so much from people around us. And that's what I love about life. And finally, in this part, we would love to know a course you've taken, probably a long time ago, because you did tell me that you did you did your PhD like I don't know, like 15 years ago. Yeah. So, what would be the most influential in your course to date? It could be something you took a long time ago, but you still remember.
What would be the most? I think so. This is going to sound a bit strange. I think because it's not one that I learned so much from that course. I learned so much, but I learned something about myself. So I did my first 2 years of my undergrad at University of Manitoba, and then I transferred to University of British Columbia, where I finished with an honors in psychology, which was the most important move that I've ever done in my life. That's what really set me off on my path in academia and got me fired up. But so my second year at University of Manitoba, I wasn't a great student in my first year. So I was just in a regular lab class, and the professor told the whole class that we were all not going to amount to anything as academics. I don't know really why he said that, but he was talking about research. You don't really need to know anything about this because you're not going to go anywhere as academics. And I just got so fired up, and I said, I'm going to show this guy that I'm going to become an academic. I'm going to publish papers. I'm going to show this guy. And I never gone back to show him. But that was a course that really fired me up, and is something that kind of keeps in my mind that, sometimes you feel like an imposter, but it's steps, right? It's like someone who tells you you can't do something. Well, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I'm not Adam Grant, but I love doing research, and I'm an academic.
Yeah, well, I love that. I think you've done so much work throughout the years, and you don't necessarily have to prove to that person now, but it does seem like you're enjoying the work. Yeah. But that's how a lot of stories start. For me, it was probably the same thing, and I can totally relate with that. It's not related to our conversation today, but I do remember someone telling me I couldn't do something, so I just went ahead and did it. I don't really need to prove to that person or talk to that person anymore. But anyway, it worked out for the best. So I love that. It's kind of like an influential course to you in that sense. And that's the first on this show. It's not like, oh, that course is really meaningful, but that person really fired you up to be doing what you're doing now. So that's very interesting. So I think by this point, our audience is probably getting to know you a bit better, especially for me. I definitely feel like I know you better now. So let's talk about today's topic. It's a mouthful of a topic, the purposeful purse. I love the name of the topic, but finding meaning in spending is probably something that a lot of us don't really think about on a daily basis. And since your research is actually focused on well-being, and the show is about well-being, I would love to ask you, Nicole, what does well-being mean to you?
What does it mean to me as a person, or what does it mean to me as an academic?
You can go both ways if you would like.
Yeah, sure. I think from a personal standpoint, I think everyone differs a little bit where they so I'll combine the personal and the academic here, because everyone can draw from a couple different sources of what we would say call happiness. So well-being as a construct can be decomposed into something simple like pleasure. That's what people often call happiness, which is, pretty much that my positive feelings are outweighing my negative feelings. So I'm trying to feel good, and I'm trying to minimize feeling bad. So this could be, I'm getting tired, and I'm starting to crave something sweet or salty as a bit of a pick me up or to make me feel better. And so I eat something, I eat a piece of cake, or I have a nice, oh my God, the coffee in Melbourne. I miss the coffee in Melbourne. I have a shot of espresso or flat white.
Yeah.
Right. And so it makes you just feel a little bit good. Right. So that would be pleasure. It's relatively simple things. They're often very hedonistic. And I would consider that for a lot of my life, I've been a very hedonistic person, and I've enjoyed that. I love traveling. I love eating good food. The food scene in Melbourne, I loved it. I really like wine because I like the art and science of it, but I love tasting wine. So that's more pleasure. And then there's this other ingredient of well-being, which is called meaning. And that's sort of the sense of having purpose. So I have goals and I'm making progress towards those goals. And those are really different for different people. Like, could be, I feel have a purpose because, I have children and I'm raising and taking care of my children and seeing them grow. Or it could be, I feel like I have a purpose. It could be religious. It could be something like, for example, I ran a marathon in memory of my grandmother. So it felt like, I had a goal. I was making progress towards it. And it was part of the bigger picture of my life of who I was as a person. It's also got a little bit of what's called a significance, which is I feel like I'm having impact on others. So for example, you might feel like a sense of significance when you do this show because you're trying to have a positive impact on your audience. And then there's this other component, which is called connection or comprehension, which is I understand my life and I feel connected to the people and the places that I'm here with. So those are the components of meaning. So as you can see, it gets kind of jargony. So we've got in well-being, we've got this sense of pleasure, we've got this sense of meaning. And the one new one that's been introduced, which I love, is called psychological richness. And this is sort of the feeling you're constantly growing and learning as a person. Or some people describe it as, like I'm making a movie in my life. It's almost like you step away from yourself and you're seeing how the narrative of your life is unfolding. And I love it. Psychological richness. You can think of going to a museum, right? And expanding your mind, or lots of people do it when they go on a trip. You could do a pleasurable trip. You could do, for example, you could go to the Caribbean or you go to Indonesia and you could just seek out sun and beautiful things and relax. You could do a meaningful trip. So you could go volunteer somewhere, or you could do the psychological richness trip. You could go, I don't know, maybe to some culture you always wanted to learn about. So those are like different components of well-being. And for me, I just love the psychological richness part because I never really understood, like through all my life, I was thinking, I'm not really just hedonistic. I'm not really just oriented to meaning. That's why I've moved into all these different cultures for periods of time, is to grow as a person, to learn about different cultures, learn about different ways of being, be inspired about the world. I love going to museums and expanding my mind. And so when I learned about psychological richness, it's like, okay, now I understand the world better.
Yeah.
So that's well-being in a 10-minute nutshell.
No, I love it. It's your own definition. It's combining your personal experience with the research that you've done, and I think that's why it's so unique to each person, right? Like when you, for example, you mentioned the coffee in Melbourne, like that is like a thing that some people can click with, but a lot of others might not relate to. So it's personal, in that sense. Yeah.
All of it's personal for sure.
Yeah. And, I also love that.
That makes it complicated. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not like a challenging thing to understand, or it's not like it's like so long to explain, because it's gonna be long. It's personal, right? So if I were to like do the same thing as you and describe my list, it's probably gonna be longer, even maybe. But I was saying that I was trying to relate to what we're gonna talk about today, because I actually thought about the list that you were kind of describing, and a big component of that is meaning, of course. But it sounds like we gain a lot from different things, different experiences in life. And a lot of that will come with spending money. And that's why today we're talking about this purposeful purse, right? Because if we're working on our well-being, we might be spending money on the wrong things, perhaps. For example, you're saying that you're enjoying traveling and, like doing all these activities. And, if you were to spend money on traveling, obviously you're going to have to cut down on spending on some other aspects, for example. And that's really interesting because I think one of the biggest misconceptions that our guests have pointed out on this show related to this is probably the fact that, more money doesn't mean that you're going to have better well-being or being happier. So that's kind of one that people have debunked on the show. And I think it is related to today's topic. And we'll go deep into that in a little bit. But I'm also curious about what other misconceptions that you've seen, especially through your research. What do people tend to get wrong when it comes to well-being, aside from that?
Yeah, I mean, though, in relation to what I study, I've been finding increasingly that people don't seem to think that money is a very good, or it's not a useful tool in terms of building meaning in life. Like, in other words, they seem to they don't want to they want to separate these things. They don't want them to touch one another. It's almost like if you use money or consumption or the marketplace to pursue meaning, then you're sullying it. Like it's becoming impure from that marketplace. And so I think that these lay beliefs that some people have, that it's almost like immoral and tainted and impure to use the marketplace. I think that's a bias. And I don't think that that's correct. I think, of course, money can't necessarily buy you meaning, right? Like you need to know how to use money in order to facilitate meaning in your life. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to buy something like I'm going to buy a new espresso machine or I'm going to buy a new pair of shoes and you're going to find meaning in those things. Instead, and this is what we're going to talk about, so I don't necessarily want to jump ahead. But that's this lay belief that people seem to have. And I think it's not correct. I think that the marketplace can be a force of good in our lives. I think a lot of us live lives that we otherwise couldn't live because of the marketplace. So we have this division of labor. I'm here in my home with things where I work. And of course, these don't necessarily give me meaning, but being able to buy electricity and buy a lamp with light bulbs and buy food and do it rather than have to do them all myself, right? Like right now, I'd just be outside with a fire right now, if it wasn't for the marketplace. This allows us to have a higher quality of life overall and allows us to pursue meaningful things. It frees us from a lot of the burdens that would prevent us from being able to pursue meaning. So I think this perception that the marketplace is bad and it sullies, I think there's a potentially a grain of truth to it, but it's not correct in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we need to look at from different perspectives because, some people might say, more money will not make my well-being better. But for some people, this actually is true because, more money means they can take care of their health better. Like maybe they're struggling with their health and they just need a little more money to actually go see the doctor or the specialist. And I know this is to be the case for some of my friends, actually. They've got some health problems that are really costly to take care of. And more money would definitely contribute to their well-being in that sense. So I think it is not a one-size-fits-all sort of perception. It got to apply to each person in different scenarios differently.
Absolutely. And people can use money in different ways. And I'm sure your guests and you've already heard about, there isn't a magic number, but the benefits of money do start going down after a certain level, once you reach solid middle class and you can, afford your bills and have some leftover spending money, right? And your health is taken care of, your physical needs. If you want to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then you're freed up to pursue these other needs and wants. And so, there is sort of this basic level, which it does contribute a lot of well-being. Yeah. And then it starts to taper off a little bit, right?
Definitely.
So especially this is one of the issues with, you get to the millions and it's 1 million is not really that different from 2 million, but 50,000 is a lot different from 70,000 for a lot of people. It would make a lot of difference between being able to take care of their health and not.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And so, we are here to talk about financial well-being and spending money meaningfully. Obviously, this is going to look really different for each person's financial scenario. But in terms of, financial literacy, how would you help our audience to understand what spending means?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of financial, I'm going to be completely frank with you. I'm not a financial literacy scholar, right? So I have studied saving in terms of if you want to save more money, like what are some ways that you can do it? And, spending is one of the tools. So if you want to save more money, you want to have more disposable income left over, there's really like 3 major buckets that are available to you. And so one is to increase your earning. And so for some people, that's one of the things that, for all its problems, has also been appealing to a lot of people is the gig economy, because it allows a lot of flexibility for people to earn some extra money here and there, or doing online work. I'm not saying that you have to go do that. I'm just saying that's one of the reasons why it's potentially appealing for them. So earning more money, and some people do that through things like investment, or for example, buying a house as a form of investment. So there's lots of different ways of trying to build your income. The other is to try to put money aside. And so that means that there needs to be some money there. For some people, that's very difficult. So then the other is the last one, which is what you asked me about, which is spending. And so spending in terms of, in terms of your balance at the end of the month, in terms of financial well-being, it's a lever. And I think you've highlighted this tension already in the conversation, which is that spending can be a way to build meaning. So you can use spending in a way that helps to improve your life and your well-being. But it also is directly related to your financial well-being. So if you reduce your spending, which is what happened a lot, it was like forced reduced spending during COVID, people started saving a lot more money. They couldn't go to restaurants all the time. They go do online shopping, but there was just so many things that were cut off from people. Or traveling, for example, was a really big one. And so people started saving more money, not necessarily because they wanted to, but because it was sort of forced upon them. So reducing your spending is definitely a way to improve your financial health. And once you have that leftover money from reduced spending, you can set it aside, or you can invest it to try to grow it. So it's a lever, right? And it's a really tricky one. And that's why so many people study it. Yeah. Because we like to use our money to try to, improve like a bunch of psychological outcomes. So we want to improve our life with it.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like, you got to understand how to spend money in the right ways to actually improve your well-being, because this overall well-being, like you briefly mentioned, it includes all aspects of our well-being, especially the financial well-being aspect is also something that people tend to neglect sometimes. And I think I myself struggle with this personally. An example of this is, for my well-being, when my mental health is not so good, like I feel like, going to restaurants or going to experiences would help me. But at the same time, that means that I don't save up as much. And that means that my purse is suffering. And that means that my overall well-being, while I thought was going to be better, is actually not as good because, then I'm a little stressed about money, for example. And I think maybe at least a few people in our audience would relate with this. I'm not sure, but I feel like I've heard this from many people. So I don't think I'm the only one here.
Oh my goodness, no. And, I've definitely been there. And there's a difference, I think, between short-term and long-term, right? And so I think this is your example was really good to highlight this, which is that, spending often brings us this sort of short-term well-being. But, ultimately that could be distracting from our long-term well-being. And, there's a bigger conversation related to spending. It also depends on where you live and what type of job you have. And so in some countries like Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands, where I've also lived, you have a really good pension system. And so, your employer contributes to it, and you have mandatory contributions as well. So because, there's an understanding that people are fallible. They have present-oriented temptations that they struggle with. And so there's an institution and a system in place to try to, make sure that people, when they're older, that this is the long-term part, that there's some security. But there's other places in the world, where people just don't have that. The institution is not set up to sort of, help people with, I guess, these individual foibles. And there's a bigger discussion that's really starting to happen in psychology and behavioral science of the fact that psychologists, behavioral scientists often study these individual reasons why we might not save enough. But really, there's also a discussion that needs to be had about these institutional devices, because maybe it's not necessarily all up to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of factors at play. So, for example, you've been to Melbourne. It's a pretty pricey city, and recently it's got even crazier. And one thing that I will say is the rental market right now is like horrible. I'm not a homeowner yet, and I rent out places, and I went from being able to afford a 1-bedroom to having to share a place because I want to live in the city, for example, and that sort of impacts my well-being too, my overall well-being. And a lot of people are dealing with this, they get stressed because in COVID it was really low in terms of rent, and then now all the landlords are increasing the price, and it's not a small increase at all. I will say the previous place I was in, the increase was I would probably say, I think it's around 25%, and that's pretty huge. Yeah.
I mean, this is also where the government can come into play, because there should be mechanisms that limit people's ability to gouge people like that. I mean, that's price gouging.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really difficult because, and like you say, because it, I know this from experience, it can be really good for your well-being to live in nice cities, to live in cities that are really designed for people.
Yeah.
Your well-being is going to be a lot better than if you live in a bigger space further away, where you're, maybe disconnected from your friends, disconnected from the life in the city. I think that's serendipity that I really missed that in COVID. And so there are, like you said, there's massive trade-offs. And so, one of the best predictors, I think, of financial well-being is not necessarily do you understand money, but it's are you budgeting, right? And so I know budgeting is really boring, and it's, maybe it can be really painful, but I think budgeting is really important that way, because it helps you prioritize what you really want in life. And then you can think about how do you use your money to best help you reach that.
Yeah, definitely. I think budgeting is one of those things that scare a lot of people like myself, because, I was never taught this growing up. And, it depends on the kind of conversations you used to have as a kid, because I think this is quite important. I remember money was always a touchy topic. And, when I asked questions like, oh, so how much money do you make and how much are we spending? My mom would also always be like, that's not your thing to worry about, for example. So it's kind of like, she wanted me to focus on my studies and whatnot. And that was, based out of good intention. But at the same time, I wasn't educated to have a good relationship with, my financial well-being. And I learned that later on, because I remember, this is really funny. So in my undergrad, I signed up to this budgeting workshop. And I walked into the workshop and they're like, oh, so which year are you in? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm a senior. I'm in my final year. And then the person running the workshop, they were like, why are you here? And I was like, well, because I never got to learn this. So I think this would be very helpful, because I'm going to study abroad very soon. So, this is going to be very helpful for me. And it was hilarious to me, because that was a good workshop. And I would have been glad that anyone would show up if I were the person that was running the workshop. But this person was so shocked that I showed up that they were like, why are you here? And I think that's why budgeting is like this topic that we probably don't talk about enough. And it's not, and I don't think it's in any curriculum as far as I'm aware. But it's so important, right?
Yeah, there are discussions now, I think, in some countries of implementing a budgeting course at I believe, the high school level. It should be introduced. I'm like you. I was completely in the same boat. I was still in the same boat that it was not something I discussed with my family. It was something that was always sort of hidden because there were always some kind of money problems. I didn't understand it. I went into a lot of debt for through my undergrad, through my PhD. I always thought about money as a way to invest in my life, and that I'm just going to invest, and try not to. I just splurge sometimes. You invest, and someday I was hoping that I would be able to pay off all the loans, and fortunately I did. It was very painful once I had to because I had accumulated a lot of interest. But I never discussed it, never learned it. And I think that's one of the things that I've been really curious about as a well-being researcher, that I'm not trained in economics. I'm not trained in finance. I didn't grow up in that type of household. A lot of the people that I work with on financial decision-making, they grew up in a household where it was discussed and learn, and they understand, the investments and all the different tools, and they have the language. They could go into a bank and they could, an investment bank, and they could talk the language. And I think that's one of the reasons why I became very interested, because I did some field work in Uganda. I did some field work in Laos. And there's so many people who would like to improve their financial decision-making, and the type of there was just too much of a disconnect between the way that researchers were thinking about it and the way people were having their lived experiences.
Yeah.
And so, I agree. I think it'd be great if we started to implement courses that would teach people these things to make it not scary, just make it just a simple thing, that you can do on maybe a monthly basis, just to sort of check in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for families to have these kinds of conversations, especially with their kids, and also to keep an open mind as to how different people might perceive this, because I think talking about it is good. But at the same time, there's a risk of, conveying the wrong kinds of information. And then, that will go with them for the rest of their lives. For example, like for me, I'm still trying to unlearn that kind of mentality of, we don't have enough money, don't even talk about it, And I think that's kind of dangerous, because I sometimes overcompensate for it myself and don't have enough savings to do certain things. And then I look at it and I'm like, oh, why am I doing this? Like, it's kind of like you don't realize it when it's happening. And then you look back and you're like, wait, I did that? Really? That much? And then, it just keeps becoming worse and worse, because if we're trying to find out meaningful ways to spend money, we can justify it with our own reasons. Anything that we spend money on, we would say that it's meaningful to us, right? So in the context of this conversation, I'm curious to know from your perspective, and you probably have talked to researchers that work in these areas, because you did mention financial decisions. How can we derive meaning from spending in a way that, would help both our well-being and our financial well-being?
That's a good question. I think you're going for a win-win. Let's see if I can find a win-win in my mind right now.
There will be some sacrifices, I think.
Yeah. One thing I have to say, and this is something that we were surprised about in our research. So I actually started this line of research when I was living in Melbourne, and I was thinking a lot about buying things that are higher quality, that will last longer. So buying fewer nicer things, right? Over buying lots of okay things, right? So the opposite of fast fashion, right?
Yeah.
Or the opposite of, I don't know, like going to Target or Hema or lots of these brands that produce a lot of cheap things, or even IKEA for that matter. So I started thinking about that a lot, and I thought when people were looking for meaning, that's what they would be doing. they would be buying fewer, nicer things. Why? Because when we buy, so one of the things that we know from research is that if you buy higher quality products, and often those come at a higher price point, not necessarily right. Price isn't exactly quality. It's just it's a non-perfect indicator. But those things tend to last longer. And why is that important for me? Well, meaning or well-being is because it gives us more chance to incorporate it into ourselves, right? So to give you a really simple example of this, I have Patagonia's zip-up fleece that I bought in 2012, I believe. So I bought it when I was going on a trip to Africa, to the Serengeti, to do a walking safari. And so normally I thought it was a little bit pricey. In the Netherlands, you're quite like price conscious. It's just like the culture in the country. So I felt like it was a bit of a splurge, but I thought it was a very comfy, looked warm, looked durable. So I bought it. So I remember that when I put it on, I remember that trip. But I also remember keeping myself warm at night in many other hikes, in many other camping trips around Australia, camping trips around Canada, keeping warm when I'm up in the middle of the night with my son. And so that has lasted me for like 13 years, 12 years, 13 years. I've had that, right? So it's not that when I bought that, I thought it was going to be a meaningful thing, but because I bought something that was durable, high quality, that I was able to use at many different points in my life, I built a lot of memories or connections of my memories to that specific product. And so it's not that a fleece gives me meaning, but having that fleece as a representation of my life gives me a lot of meaning. So that's what I mean when it becomes integrated in yourself. So a lot of people feel like this with their coffee makers. So people who are really into making a nice espresso or a flat white, what have you. They love it because when people come over after dinner, they can make a nice cup of espresso, or in the morning when they want to write. They make a nice cup of espresso and then they write in the morning, and it's just sort of is a highlight of their day. And so so that can be bad for your pocketbook, right? Up front, it looks bad for it, but the good news, and these are like the durable things. The good news is these nicer, durable things, they last you longer, so you have to replace them less. So that might mean you're spending less money over time, because if I only have to buy one fleece every 12 years instead of one fleece every 12 years, right? 12 fleeces in 12 years. Well, then it's actually a bargain, right? So maybe at the beginning it's $30 more expensive, but in the end, I'm saving time and I'm saving money and I'm saving a headache from having to go replace it. So this was our idea, is that meaning would lead people to do this because that's how they could drive meaning from their consumption. But like I told you before, it turns out people have these biases that the marketplace isn't good for their meaning. They think about all the different things they can do for them with their money. And so they actually end up buying usually the cheaper thing, which is not great for their pocketbook, right? So on the one hand, what I'm saying is that, if you sort of, consciously get over the fact that you're not buying a product for meaning itself, you're buying it as a tool or just like a companion on your journey to going to find meaning, then I think that can potentially save you money over time because you're buying something that's high quality. And if you don't want to believe that, the good news is that what happens when you think about meaning in consumption is that you think about all the other different things you can do with your money. Just naturally. It's really amazing. There's a big discussion in the financial literacy domain about the fact that people don't think about, it's called opportunity costs when they're going to buy a product. So they just focus on, should I buy this pen or should I not buy this pen? Should I buy this fleece or not buy this fleece, rather than, should I buy this fleece, one fleece that's maybe $120, another fleece that's that's only $90, and with that $30 left over, I can buy the fleece and I can buy, I don't know, a pen, or I can buy an avocado smash or whatever. I don't know what the new hit is now. That was like back in the day when I was there. Right. And so that's thinking about opportunity costs. What else can I do with my money? And when people think about meaning, when they think about buying things in order to pursue meaning, that's what they naturally think about, even though normally we don't think about opportunity costs. So on that, so you can either use money as a way to derive meaning by using it as a tool and buying durable products, so nicer, fewer things, or you can leverage this opportunity cost consideration and say, how can I find meaning in this thing? And you're going to naturally think about opportunity cost, and you're going to spend less money in the moment. That's probably not going to help your overall, your momentary hedonic well-being, but it will help your financial well-being, if that all makes sense. I'm happy to unpack any of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that concept of opportunity cost is probably going to be new to a lot of our audience members. I mean, thankfully, I went to business school, so I sort of learned this back in the day. But the application is actually tougher, right? And this actually goes with budgeting too, because, it's kind of like, let's say a group of friends is having a conversation. Oh, let's go here. Let's go on a trip here. And for that to happen, there's got to be budgeting involved, right? And then there would be, in parallel, conversations about, oh, we should buy this, we should buy that. And then, this or that needs to be sacrificed in order for the trip to happen, or vice versa. So I think it's kind of like, it's something that we probably don't think about too much, especially when it's the short term, right? You're having a bad day and you're like, oh, I just want to feel better right now. I'm just going to go out and have dinner outside. And that will, probably make the process of saving for your trip a bit longer, even though it doesn't seem like it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why we are really bad about thinking about opportunity costs. That, it's not just thinking about what else we can do with our money, but it's also just thinking about the impact of that money in the long term, because we have a really strong present-oriented bias where when you want to feel better just now, or if it's the end of the day and you're really tired, it's hard to think about trying to sacrifice those things.
Yeah.
As trying to sacrifice something that will make you feel better.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is there's another term called financial slack. And it's this idea that how much sort of buffer do you have in terms of your money, how much extra money. And even if you don't necessarily actually have extra money, I think people tend to perceive that they have more financial slack. And so in terms of going for dinner, or I've done this many, many times before, I can have dinner now, but that doesn't, right? You said it doesn't really impact my saving for the trip. You don't think about it that way, because somehow this money is going to just reappear. It's going to regenerate.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's tricky.
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. And that's why potentially, if you can start thinking about, what would be, instead of what is pleasurable, will this make me feel good right now? So you can start thinking about this in terms of meaning. Is this aligned with my purpose? Is this aligned with significance? What would give me a sense of purpose right now? What would give me a sense of significance? What would give me a sense of connection? And all of those concepts really start to switch your brain from the present orientation to more of a future orientation. And I think that switch, just starting to ask yourself those questions, if you can, and they're, it's a really pretty relatively simple prompt. If you can, I think that can switch your thinking enough that it could get you out of the present bias, and it could start getting you thinking about these opportunity costs. We're actually in the middle of testing these type of interventions right now for improving savings among Indigenous populations here in Canada.
That's wonderful. And, that's why we're here to talk about the purposeful purse, right? Because when we flip it and think about it from the purpose perspective, I think it will be better than use the term budget, because that scares a lot of us. We're like, oh, I have to budget.
Yeah.
No,
it feels like a big sacrifice. I think that's the hard part, right? It feels like you're depriving yourself. And especially if you're like at the end of the day and you're not feeling well, you don't want to deprive yourself. But if you can flip it to, well, like, is this really gonna, like, how is this gonna affect me tomorrow? Or is this like, what is aligned with my purpose? Or what else could I use this money for right now that would better give me a sense of significance or purpose? I think those type of questions really they're very powerful for changing our thinking, because
absolutely
we're pretty ingrained to think about these things, not just pleasure. I mean, pleasure maybe is a bit more primary, but meaning is something that runs deep in people. It can be a very powerful thing to start asking ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So now let's talk about a practice. We've gone into quite a few examples and theories. So let's kind of synthesize all of them into a practice that our audience can take home today, or maybe they're already home listening to this podcast, but you know what I mean. So what would be a practice that you personally do, or you would recommend to, the general public to try to derive some meaning from their spending?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I was thinking of this example where I was on sabbatical last year, and I was in Portugal. I was at the school called Nova School of Business and Economics near Lisbon. It's a beautiful school. It's right where the river meets the ocean. And it's one of the famous surfing spots, Carcavelos. So it's maybe like Bell's Beach, for example. It's sort of like similar in terms of its importance. And I wanted to remember my time there, because it's a place where I felt very inspired. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of thinking. And so I wanted to get a memento. And so I went down to the surf shop, or the couple shops down there, but one was a Billabong shop. And I was looking for just something that I could buy as a memento to remind me of my time there. And like we were just talking about, like asking myself that question of, how is this going to be meaningful? I just felt like all of it was going to be a waste of money. Like it's somehow like in relationship to that how meaningful the experience was, I just wasn't really. So I actually walked out of the shop without anything, and I actually regret that now. I don't think I was asking the right questions, and so I regret that now. As a different example, like where I did actually find meaning from my purchase, I was looking for a coat, and this was sort of just I was in Chicago for work. I didn't bring appropriate attire. I was living in Florida at the time. So I arrived in Chicago. It's really cold. It was November in Chicago. And I didn't have a lot of money at the time. And I went to a store and I went to go buy a coat. And all the coats that were in my price range, I just felt like I don't know. They weren't calling to me. They weren't suited for me. So I actually bought something that was out of my price range at that time, but I just loved when I put it on. I felt connected to the person I wanted to be. Not the person who I was necessarily at that moment, but the person who I wanted to become. Maybe it reminded me of my grandmother. I'm not sure. And so it was really hard, but I decided to splurge. And I bought it. And I mean, it wasn't like extravagant splurge. I wasn't at like a Chanel or like, it was modest at that time, right? Like it's all relative.
Yeah.
And I still have that coat now, 17 years later. I still wear it. I still get compliments on it. And it's still, it's just like one of these. So one thing I think is really important is when you're trying to buy something that's meaningful to you, I think you need to ask yourself, it sounds like a really like mundane question, but like, how long am I going to use this for? Does this fit? Like, does this connect me to the person I want to be? Does this connect me to the life I want? Does this connect me to the earth I want this earth to be, right? So I think these are the questions that you can ask yourself, and they all are about, I think, growing with a product over time. And I see meaning a lot as a process of growth, as is growing yourself as an individual. And that means growing alongside things, growing alongside family members or friends, or like for example, I rewilded in my backyard. So growing as a person alongside my plants, right? There's lots of different ways of growing, but I think it means, thinking about the long term and what is the impact I want to have on the world, and does this connect me with the person I want to be?
Definitely. I think that's a powerful question to ask. Most of the time we spend money before asking ourselves any questions, right? And I think this can really change our habits of spending because we want to find meaning out of the spending we make. Even the little things we do on a daily basis, like getting a coffee. I'm that kind of a person. Like I need to start my day with a coffee, and I will splurge on coffee every day. And I remember reading an analysis on the coffee spending habit. Like imagine you spend $5 on a coffee every day, every single morning. Let's say you spend that, times that with 30. How much money is that? Think about how much you can actually save towards things that mean more to you in the long run. Maybe spending on coffee is not, it doesn't sound like a lot of money because like $150 a month, it doesn't seem like a lot. But when we think about that kind of spending and, the same thing with other things, it adds up, like same as eating out, same as, like splurging on tiny little things you're probably never going to use again. So that question you ask is quite powerful. And, I think it applies to a lot of things. Like today, having a coffee outside and actually sitting down, enjoying that coffee in a cafe is nice. But getting a takeaway coffee might not bring that much joy. And you can actually save by bringing your own coffee. So yeah, I think it's like a combination of different questions and different things we can strategize in our lives.
Yeah, it's really funny. It reminds me of when I was at UniMelb and I was teaching in first year, like undergrad, principles of marketing course. And I don't remember what it was, but I showed them, these two options, like buy this, pack of coffee beans, like a bag of coffee beans, or this other bag of coffee beans. And I showed them the price. I don't know, it was like maybe $25 for a bag of coffee beans. And I said, oh, that's so expensive. And they said, how much do you spend on coffee every day? Like $5. Okay. So, in 5 days, you're spending the same amount they would spend on probably maybe 3 weeks of coffee, right? With a bag of coffee beans, right? So because a lot of people don't do that math. And so I think this is where, budgeting and I use budgeting in like a really loose form is just sort of taking stock, like on a monthly basis is like where like the different chunks of my money going? And do I really feel like, from that distance perspective, do I think that's giving me value in life? And, for some people, maybe it really does, like it, for whatever reason, maybe they have really tough nights. Maybe they care for a family member and they don't get a lot of sleep and they love getting out of the house in the morning and having a bit of time to themselves and having a coffee out, and then that's perfectly great. But if you feel like, when you take stock and you say, okay, I'm spending $150, I don't really feel like I'm getting $150 value, then that's something that you can change. It's a habit, so it's a little bit hard. But that's something you can change. And that's why I think this budget kind of gives you a big picture view. I think you can ask the question of, does this help me become the person I want to be? Both when you're doing a budget, but also when you're making especially big ticket purchases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is definitely a powerful practice. And if we can turn that into a habit, we're good. And we don't actually have to think too much. Budgeting can be daunting because some people are like, oh, does that mean that every time I make a purchase, I have to look at my budget and things like that? But, once we've made that a habit, I think it will be much easier because we naturally just don't spend over budget.
Yeah. Yeah. I think budget is like another way you're talking about is like, what are going to be my spending habits? Like, what am I going to do with my money rather than calling it a budget? Like, I think, what this conversation is reminding us we need to come up with a new word but we just need to rebrand it.
Yeah.
There's a huge problem with the name budgeting.
Yeah.
And we need to rebrand it. And, because I think it's just, it's just like taking stock, just like at the end of the month, a lot of people look at their goals. What are the progress they made on my various goals? It's just something similar. It doesn't have to be intense calculations. It doesn't have to be a spreadsheet. It can be even like, it's just sort of like back of the envelope, kind of where is my money going? And is that where I want it to be going? And a lot of banks now really help people as well. Like if you look at credit card statements, groups things in different categories.
Yeah.
And so you can just download like that report and just, and that doesn't take anywhere. It just takes downloading. And I think this is the hardest part. It takes being willing to look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And so,
yeah.
That's the hardest part is looking at it because we don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
And so
definitely.
I think we just have to sort of, maybe we treat ourselves. Maybe say, I'm going to go to a cafe or I'm going to go to a bar. Or we're like, I'm going to, download this. And
yeah, exactly.
Drink will give us a bit of courage.
Yeah, absolutely. That would help me for sure. So thank you for that tip. Because, I'm terrified of looking at my statements because it's long. And, I was like, I don't want to look at this, So it's just good to treat ourselves.
I think so. Like, I think, have a beer, like be compassionate to yourself and like make it fun or just make it, like a monthly ritual. Yeah. And, rather than it doesn't have to be sterile. You don't have to pick out glasses from your, put on glasses and take out a cup, it can be fun. And I think it can be turned into a tool that can help us build the life that we want to build.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I mean, this conversation is way more fun than I expected because, I was like, okay, we're probably going to talk about budget and I'm going to freak out because I don't do that very well.
No, I don't either. I think of budget in a pretty rough kind of way, which is just like, like I said, just sort of like taking a general stock and like getting a general sense. Mm-hmm. But I'm not a budgeter. And, to be honest, like I said, like I didn't grow up learning about how to deal with money. And I think, my husband is a lot more, I think he's a lot more conservative when it comes to money. And so that's been like a really nice thing. And there's research on this where I'm, a little bit more like of a spendthrift. He's a little bit more of a tightwad. And so we sort of just balance each other out that way where like I allow him to like spend money a little bit more in ways that we find, fun, sometimes meaningful, sometimes life building. And he helps me rein in some of my potentially, where I just don't think about the long-term implications of my spending. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that. That's kind of the couple dynamic we should have. I remember reading about, and just to close this out, because I know we are kind of out of time, but I really want to throw in that, if you are sort of planning for a trip or, trying to do something that requires budgeting, again, I'm going to air quote this because I'm scared of the word. There's a thing that is fun to do if you're doing this with your friend or even with your partner. It's good to try. So they would designate the roles. So if there are two people, the one can be the dreamer and the other one will be the accountant.
Oh,
the dreamer will come up with they're going to do, how they're going to have fun. And the accountant will keep that in check in terms of, like, can we actually make it happen? And, like, if we were to make it happen, what do we need to do? So I think that's quite fun, to kind of have that dynamic and make it like a shared project with your friend, your partner, your family even, that will make it, I think make the spending and the purposeful spending a bit easier because you're talking about it and you're open about it and you keep that in mind all the time. Anyway, on that topic, I just wanted to throw that in. But since we're almost out of time, yes?
No, I was going to say that perfectly highlights what we were talking about before, which is like there's like someone who it's like two parts of ourselves, but sometimes it can be two people. One is like maximizing well-being and the other one is like focused on the monetary. And it's like, how do we find that balance? It could be two parts of ourselves or it could be two individuals. It's great. Exactly. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. And as I was saying, we are approaching the end of the podcast. So before we let you go, we've got open mic where you can talk about anything you're passionate about and you would like to share with us that you didn't get the opportunity to do earlier in the conversation. So this is your platform, Nicole. Go for it.
Well, yeah, great. Thanks so much. So as you mentioned before, I'm the director of the Wellbeing Research Lab. And so we call it WiRL. That's our acronym, which kind of is meant to sound like fun. It's like, I know you can't read it that way, but it's WiRL. It also sounds a little bit like world, which we're like a very worldly also group. So please do check us out. We're wellbeingresearchlab.com, or you can Google my name, Nicole Mead, and you can interact with our content. Please feel free to reach out. You can find all of our up-to-date research there. And I really do love to hear from people about their practices related to research, because that's where I find a lot of inspiration. And I'd also like to say that one of the things that I do think can really bring you a lot of meaning and purpose is using your money for the benefit of others. So that could be buying gifts for other people. It could be saving for a child's education, but it also could be donating to charity. So, for example, it was my son's second birthday this past week, and he has way too many toys. And so on behalf of him, I donated money to a local charity. And that's what all his friends who came to his birthday party, all their families did as well. And they all found it a really nice practice. Instead of all bringing toys, they donated to a charity of their choice in the community to help people who are a lot more disadvantaged of ourselves. And it was just a really nice way, I think, to commemorate and celebrate together, rather than with things and stuff, more by giving to others. So I encourage you all to just sometimes take a moment and do what you can, and it can be much or as little, and contribute to others. And I think it will, give you a long-lasting sense of joy and purpose.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing a few things with our audience that are all really meaningful, especially your work. And thank you for a fun conversation about well-being and financial well-being, especially. It's not easy to talk about this topic. I've learned a few things, especially a few questions I can ask myself. And I know I'm not the only one in sort of, winging it with my budget. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's probably going to need some improvement for sure, given what you just shared with me. So I'll make sure to apply all the above, and hopefully our audience will do the same.
Oh, great. I hope so as well. Please do let me know if you have any feedback on any of what you try. I'd love to hear more.
Definitely will. Thank you. You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.